Hello, it's Amy, and I'm here today with a memoir, a bookish memoir, published in 2022 by Oliver Darkshire, and this is called Once Upon a Tome, The Misadventures of a Rare Bookseller. Now, when this first arrived, I was trying to puzzle out whether it was a novel or a memoir. It is indeed a memoir, and a pretty entertaining memoir at that. It's not very long, only about 250 pages or less. I think it's less, yeah. Uh, but it was enjoyable to work my way through piecemeal over the course of a couple of days, reading about some very interesting, events and anecdotes of what it was like for the author to work in a rare bookstore. And so this is certainly a rare bookstore as opposed to, your typical used bookstore. This is a bookstore in England called Sotheran's, and they once tried to advertise themselves as the oldest bookstore in the world, but of course they are not. There is an older one, but they have been around since the 1700s, although be it under different ownership, and the original family lineage that owned the shop is long gone. But he started working there almost by accident. The pay was pretty low, and he ended up making a career out of it. And I quite enjoyed reading through it. There's some pretty funny things. One of the first oddities he talks about is kind of non-bookish antiquarian items that the shop would occasionally take on, including these, dried out carved gourds. One being in the likeness of Queen Victoria, that someone impulsively purchased thinking they would sell, but then they ended up sitting because there's not very many people in the market for a gourd carved of Queen Victoria. But I just love the atmosphere of this shop. You can just imagine it, this busy shop with all these booksellers, absolutely stuffed full with books and dust in every corner, and just the descriptions of how cluttered this place is. He's assigned this little desk, and later on they uncover this larger desk that he wants, but then the owner of the shop thinks the desk is too big and not correctly placed, and it's hauled off. But he later discovers some other desks that nobody knew were there because they'd gotten so buried in books, and how people would buy a piece of antique furniture thinking they would sell a podium, for instance, and it would sit on the floor with a price tag, and then slowly it would get taken over by the books and by the environment of the shop, until they no longer remembered it was there, and it kind of became almost a root of the entire shop. There's a story of a fire, well, not a fire inspection, but I guess a workplace health and safety inspection. And the man who shows up is completely unprepared for a inspection of a bookshop like this. You can imagine him showing up, with a checklist, make sure no one's going to trip over a rug, make sure all cords are correctly tied back, make sure emergency exits are clear. And this guy is just like a million things you could trip over. At first he thinks, the old style ladders are there for decoration, and then they're like, no, we use those ladders, we have to. A funny story about trying to deliver a coat rack, a coat stand, that they seem to be sharing back and forth with another bookshop, and all these fun little stories about visiting the cellars and trying to keep track of their archives. And no one really knows the history of this bookshop because they keep repeatedly losing their archives. And so there's not a lot of historical material that could be incorporated into this book. You really just have word of mouth, and I guess they did at one point have an archivist, a historian, come in and do a workup, gather all these materials and put it together in an archive for them, but it eventually kind of got lost and eaten up in just the chaos of this shop. And there's a lot of fun stories about the sort of people who come in to sell books, and of course the sort of people who buy books. And I think it was really, those personal stories about specific incidents in the bookshop that caused me to enjoy it so much. Because I think almost any 21st century memoir about book selling is going to have kind of these profiles of the people who buy and sell books. That's pretty standard. And I'm trying to remember what terms he used here. They really didn't stand out all that much to me. Spindleman. He uses the word the spindleman, a mysterious visitant with hair like straw and a temper of Rumpelstiltskin. He turns up more frequently than I would like, lugging an entire cart full of books, which he attempts to sell to anyone who will countenance the idea. So the people who show up with basically a bunch of junk, but they want you to say exactly the right words, and occasionally they have something that is of value. Then you have to try to guess exactly what they want to be paid for it to avoid conflict. And then there are Draculas and cryptids, and so all these interesting mythical names that he's given to the sort of people who buy and sell books. And if you read enough book memoirs, you'll see various forms of these categorizations that different authors and booksellers have made over the years. You can go, I think, right back to an essay by George Orwell in the 1930s, I think. Maybe it was the 1940s, where he talks about the sort of people you will find in bookshops. So that's nothing new. I guess I would say nothing groundbreaking or unique about this memoir, but overall quite enjoyable. And if you're the kind of person who likes the genre of bookshop memoir, I think this is a great new release to pick out. And I quite like the US cover on this book. It's this beautiful green. The UK edition is nowhere near as beautiful. The UK edition kind of has a image of a bookshop on the cover, whereas this is much more abstract here. And I do have to say, this seems to be the exception in terms of book covers. More often than not, it's the UK covers that are so much nicer than the American covers. And here in Canada, we get kind of a mixture. Sometimes we get the American editions to market, sometimes we get the UK editions to market, and once in a blue moon there'll be a particular Canadian edition, which is kind of rare. We usually get one or the other. But I'm just trying to think if there's anything more I wanted to share about this particular book. I guess I can show you the image of the antiquarian gourd of nebulous origin. And our author has a bit of an incident with these gourds early on, and it's sort of the nature of the shop that you can sort of let it absorb your mistakes and deny it all later. And keys. Apparently there are many keys in the shop, and cases that the keys are lost for. And at one point, they've been paying rent on a cellar where they store a bunch of stock, but then they discover, paperwork and finances, that they've been paying rent on a second cellar that nobody has been to in decades. And of course, they go to that cellar and they don't find much of anything. I think they said, a couple of empty filing cabinets and some papers from one of their competitors. No books, unfortunately. But yeah, this was a good one and something that I would recommend. But I'll leave it at that.